Welcome. Can you hear me? Why does it say no viewers? Oh my gosh, what the heck? All right. Can you hear me now? Are we good? Why does it say no viewers? All right. Can you guys hear me? No. Are you screwing with me? Not bad. 40 viewers, and they'll trickle in as we get going here. Just making sure I'm doing the live event stuff right. Let me go to my stream page. John's going to be here in a little bit, and we should be good to go. Where's my live chat? Live control room. Here we go. Stream status good. All right. Where's the chats at? There we go. All right. Can you guys hear me? All you 40 nerds in the chat. Awesome. All right. Yeah. Before John gets here, we'll have a little bit of warm up and conversation. Let the other nerds trickle in, like Ron Reagan's trickle in nerd economy. When will I be on the Warski stream? They keep saying next week. They said, like I said the other day, that the guy that they're getting is supposed to be down. Big YouTuber, bigger than Styx, bigger than Stefan. So let's cross your fingers and let's hope that it goes down this week on Warski stream. Andy says it should be good. We'll see. I don't know if that'll be Wednesday or Thursday, but probably somewhere in there. If the big name guy agrees to it. So was Cooper dead in season 3? Yeah, Twin Peaks stuff. I think so. I think we're supposed to think that he was, and this was a different, alternate dimension. But that'll be in the book. By the way, here's the next 400 pages of Esoteric Hollywood 2, and then that'll be in there. So taking forever. It takes forever to write books. But this is just to trigger everybody and to make evangelicals mad. I'm going to play the Russian Orthodox proclamation of anathemas that's read on Triumph of Orthodoxy Sunday. And this one's neat because only in the Russian do you hear the specific kind of, it's directed at those who would not listen to the Imperium, right? The God-ordained emperors. So it's just going to be a couple minutes because I'm going to pour my coffee. It's late. I'm tired, but we're going to have a good talk with John. And I'll be back in about 3 minutes, and you can listen to the proclamations of the anathemas against those who don't accept the God-ordained Orthodox emperors. Does your church sing anathema? Anathema. That is wild. It reminds me, if you've ever seen the Thomas Becket movie with Richard Burton when he does the anathema. Lord Gilbert, we pronounce you anathema. And yeah, you might as well not go crazy in the chat because I have the thing turned on. What? We're not here to talk about Baphomet, dude. Why you keep bringing that up? Well, I'm glad you want to talk about Satan, but we're here tonight to talk about we're here to talk to John Adams of Hoaxbusters. If you've listened to Jay's analysis, you're familiar with John Adams. John will be joining us shortly. That's all right. All right, we're getting up here into the 90 nerds. 90 nerds up in here. What's up, nerds? John Adams is going to join us here in a little bit. And he did a lot of research on evangelical gobbledygook. And that's the theme for tonight. That's what we're going to talk about. I was raised in this gobbledygook, so I know about it. John was as well. Now, John's not Orthodox. He's not coming from the Orthodox perspective. He's coming from the perspective of having done a lot of research, just kind of on the geopolitical tip. And so we're going to really delve into that because that's a big puzzle piece. If you don't get the geopolitical side of all the premillennial gobbledygook, you're going to be confused. And actually, that's a big part of it. That really explains it. Once you get that, you're like, oh, that's why Russia is Gog and Magog. Has nothing to do with what the Bible's actually talking about. It's used by geopolitical groups to demonize whoever is the current, supposed antichrist character that's useful to Washington's foreign policy. So we will also talk about, I've got whole stacks of books that I'm going to recommend. It's not going to be boring, but we will get into maybe some verses here and there. Uh-oh, do we have John?
We have John.
We have John's on. We have John's on.
How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, John. It's been many months since we talked, and we've already got us here just at the beginning, 100 live nerds watching. How are you?
Jay, I haven't felt this good in a while. It's so good to see you on the air.
Is that I always get your Johnny Carson and your Alex mixed up.
Yes. Sometimes they cross over.
Well, you do a really good version of both, and a lot of people in the chat are saying hello, John. For those that might be new, yes, I will. By the way, I'm going on. People are saying bring on Davis. Davis and I and Matt are going to be doing a live show Monday, I think. John, tell us who you are and your site, what kind of work you do for those that are not familiar with John Adams.
I am a co-host.
Okay, hold on.
Commute.
Okay, go ahead.
HoaxBustersCall.com, and myself and my friend Chris Kendall, we talk about all things.
Hey, John, pause 1 second here. We're getting echo.
What's that?
We're getting an echo. Let me fix the voice thing here. I think this should solve. Okay, does everybody hear John better now?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me better?
Okay, yeah, everybody says this sounds good now. Okay, so as we were saying, John is the guy from Hoaxbusters. Start over, John. Tell all the new listeners, watchers, who you are and what you do.
I co-host the Afternoon Commute with Chris Kendall at HoaxBustersCall.com. It's a weekly podcast. We're on a hiatus for a little bit right now, taking it easy. But if you go back into our archives, you can find we got something like 500 calls that we've done together. Done a lot of research, special reports. That's why you have me here to talk about one of the special reports that we did today. You've obviously been on numerous times, countless times with us, had some of the best calls we've ever had with you. So yeah, I'm sure a lot of the listeners to Jay's analysis are familiar with the mega, the term you coined, mega interview.
I think we did kind of get that going, because now, if you've noticed, what's the trend in YouTube is everybody's doing these like 4, 5, 6 hour live streams. I mean, I'm not literally saying we started that before people go crazy, but we did do that, and we were having a lot of fun with those 6 hour epic marathon live streams. And now this is YouTube has gone crazy with debates. Now this is the hottest thing. Where was this 10 years ago? I would have 1 million subscribers by now if I knew that there was live stream debates 10 years ago. Maybe there wasn't 10 years ago. I don't know. Anyway, tonight we're here to discuss the most recent research that you've done. And I've listened to some of the podcasts that you've done. Really good stuff. Really jives well with information that I lived, because I grew up in the evangelical premillennial kind of mindset. I got really into that when I was 18 or 19. And then I kind of grew out of it for various reasons. We're not going to go into all that per se, but what you focused on in your podcasts and in your talks was a lot of the geopolitical and kind of dubious, shady character aspects behind these guys who are so prominent and put up there for us to follow, like the Hal Lindsays and this kind of stuff. So maybe we can just dive right in and get into talking about some of these characters and seeing how ridiculous they are. And I thought I knew a lot about this. John, you're one of the most well-read guys I know. You had all kinds of facts about these guys that I'd never heard. That was just like, who in their right mind, I guess because people just don't know this, but who would in their right minds would listen to these people after being wrong so many zillions of times? And I was particularly cracking up at Hal Lindsay's scheme of like, the rapture's coming, and then the money that comes in, he's like investing in property in Malibu. That was cracking me up. So, John, tell us about these characters. Just dive right in.
Well, just to preface it, around the 1950s, 60s, around there, you see a trend with the church, kind of, streaming across all particular denominations. I guess, Lutheran, Methodist, all that type of stuff. And for the most part, they, worship service is kind of standardized to a certain extent. I'm just giving a generalization. By the way, I don't claim to be a religious expert. My knowledge of religion is only empirical, and I've read the Bible 2 times. So they have a standardized kind of worship service, no matter what denomination you kind of go into. It's kind of similar. And by the time the 1960s and the culture change, the radical leftist type stuff starts popping into the mainline culture, in academia and just in pop culture and whatnot, it starts to actually leak over into the church. And I'm suspicious as to whether the churches were being led down this path
right
on purpose.
Right.
And one of the things you start to see pop up is youth groups. And the churches, I would say for the most part, churches probably during that time period aligned themselves with anti-communist type stuff.
Right.
And I'd say the average pew dweller didn't realize that, maybe similar things were kind of seeping into their church, like youth groups, youth oriented type stuff. So worship services were changing where, teenagers or pre-teens, as they're called now, those type, they would, go out of the service and then go into a youth-oriented type thing, separating the children from the parents, and then thus creating a kind of like I don't know, maybe like a more dumbed down kind of thing for the kids. And
It
then,
is. No, you're absolutely right. This is the history of Sunday school, which was a Protestant invention to kind of have tailored messages for different groups, niche markets, and it really reflects kind of a market view of how to do the church and this kind of stuff. And actually, this is not just going to be an Orthodox type podcast or discussion here, but I will say, just because it's relevant to your point, that this has been a long time criticism of Orthodoxy, is that even going back to the Roman Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, around the time of the Carolingians, you have a change in praxis to where prior to that, it was normative for children to participate in the fullness of all the sacraments, even infants. And that's why the Orthodox Church, for example, always continues the practice of paedo communion. Infants take communion even. This changed, and nobody debates this, about 900 or roughly in the Latin Church. And then you kind of have that tendency in the Protestant churches to continue that tradition of splitting groups and people off into different sections, to have children's church, to have Sunday school. And it's not that there's a problem with having some sort of Bible study before church. That's not the point. The point is that this was a kind of intentional, I would say, separation of groups out of what would be for us communal worship. So I think you're absolutely right there. I was glad when you noticed that actually, and yes, you're correct that even in the Protestant world, in the Roman Catholic world, this in America became more prevalent, this splitting off and the invention of children's church and Sunday school and all this stuff, precisely because as it got into the Cold War period, they really wanted, I think, to alter the landscape of America, not just through the pop culture, but it also through the churches. And that's what's so crucial. And if you read Wim Hof's book that Tim Kelly has done, interviews with this guy, this really demonstrates this point powerfully from a Catholic perspective, that even in the Catholic Church, this was the case. So that was a long rant. Go ahead, John.
No, that's fine. I did this talk with Chris, and I did this talk with Tim Kelly as well. So I welcome your input, and the extra things you can add are definitely welcomed. Yeah, Sunday school's an invention. You're right. Of Southern California, interestingly enough, the extensive research Chris and I have talked about Southern California comes from a lady by the name of Henrietta Mears, and she kind of pushed this idea of Sunday school out into the world, and she was actually the mentor to Bill Bright, the creator of the Campus for Crusades for Christ.
Right. Okay. This is good.
She was also very. She played a big role in the Billy Graham Crusades when Billy Graham was first coming out in late 1940s. She used her Sunday school to kind of push his ministry. She was also very she was very helpful to Ronald Reagan too, with his governor and his presidential election and whatnot. These you'll see these characters throughout this throughout this discussion kind of pop in and out here, but getting back to the worship service, by the time you get into the late 1960s, you start to see this kind of rebellion against traditional worship service kind of come in. And one thing you see out of this is you start to see these new kind of forms of worship service, church start to take place.
So you're talking about like the rise of non-denominational churches, yes, and strip mall churches?
Absolutely. Yes. Industrial park churches. That's where I went to church, in an industrial park. Yeah. So you see this rise of, we don't want steeples. We don't want old people and pews. We want young people with long hair and sandals, and ex-hippies and ex-druggies and all that type of stuff. Not knocking that. Like I said, I grew up around that type of stuff. good people. This has nothing to do with people's evangelical beliefs or anything. I myself am not a religious person. I was raised religious, but I don't go with any particular belief system. But so I'm just looking at it objectively, and so with these people who were true believers, I believe that this movement was created and used for something a little bit later down the line into the 1980s. It created this idea of an apocalyptic religion. It was people were primed for this, and it wasn't only the church; it was the culture in general was kind of primed for this apocalypse. You know, Charles Manson is, having people murdered everywhere,
Yeah.
and it's the end of the world. People are on drugs. Oh my gosh. This was also used as something to get people into the church. It's like, hey, the end of the world is coming, so you better accept Jesus. You better get in there. It was also used by the Campus Crusades and promoted throughout this particular type of evangelicism. You saw the rise of this kind of new thing of being born again. And born again didn't always apply to non-believers. It was actually to other believers. You see, it wasn't good enough that you were a Christian. You had to be born again. You had to accept the Holy Spirit. If you didn't accept the Holy Spirit, you weren't doing it the right way. If you
Yeah.
read Bill Bright's book, he actually says that this is kind of a tactic that you need to go out and proselytize to believers because they're
Yeah.
doing it wrong.
This is a great point. Yeah, the charismatic movement will figure into this in a big way because I think you can very easily see from the entire history of the charismatic movement that it was something that was co-opted. And while you're talking about Bill Bright, it reminds me there's a great chapter in Ingdahl's newest book, Lost Hegemon, where he discusses the CIA intentionally choosing and using not just Billy Graham and the Billy Graham crusade, but also that the Pentagon is who initially put the money into Campus Crusade. And so you're absolutely right. This is in the period of the Cold War. And it's part of that, evil empire dialectic that the Pentagon was putting so much money into. And that's where you get the rise of the moral majority, the rise of the evangelical Protestant dominionist movement, who originally links up with Pat Robertson.
Yeah. You start to see all this stuff starts to come about all at the same time. Really, like, by the end of the 70s into the early 80s, it all rises up around Reagan, and so you have this generation of people from 1967 to 1980 who were kind of primed for this period. There wasn't going to be an apocalypse. I mean, I'm sure my parents didn't believe that there was. People in the pews, I'm sure there were actual preachers who did believe that there was going to be one. But a lot of this comes from a book called The Late Great Planet Earth that was written by Hal Lindsey in 1971, and it's a ridiculous book. It's a hilarious book to read now, and to think that he's updated it every 2 years or whatever every time.
I was just looking on YouTube a few minutes ago, and if you Google Hal Lindsey, you'll find the prophecy report or Hal Lindsey report or whatever it is, and it's still like he's still running this game. He's like still making bank on the prophecy. You would think that it would die away and that people would, but no. It's like, how does Jim Bakker come back on and have a TV show? How does Jimmy Swaggart come back and have a TV show? Hal Lindsey still pimping the rapture.
Yeah, and even some of the I remember I don't know if Hal Lindsey's ever been on Alex Jones or anything, but I remember Alex Jones saying once he had Joseph Farah on one time, and I remember he said he would love to get Hal Lindsey on and how great of a book Late Great Planet Earth is. Not kidding.
Folks, that book woke me up. It's unbelievable, folks. The rapture is coming. The only thing I'm worried about is if the rapture happens, am I going to be on the can? Will I be clothed? What if I'm in the shower? I'm sure Hal, as a theologian, could answer those difficult questions.
Folks, what if the rapture comes? What am I going to do with all the Superman vitality? If there's nobody to sell it to, I'm just going to have to eat it myself. Yeah. So Hal Lindsey, he writes this book, and there's a great article. Everybody can go look it up. It was put out by Humanities Magazine. It was winter of 2017. Excellent article, and it basically goes over. It was coincidental because it was a great article, because this is kind of stuff I've been looking at for about 2 years, and I read this article and I'm all, man, this is basically everything I've been looking at for 2 years condensed down into one article here. So yeah, Humanities Magazine, you can find that article on Hal Lindsey and the Apocalyptic Religion. And
real quick, let me add. So for the people that are watching, that we've already had some super chats come in, and if you want to really get some questions at the end, the way to get me to read the questions is to send a super chat. It doesn't matter what amount, any amount, and we will read the questions and we'll answer them later on when we get kind of done with the interview part. But so you were talking about Hal Lindsey, you were talking about in the interviews that I've heard you do on this subject matter, and it's crucial. I think it's vital to understand the Pentagon's influence here. And if you look at the cults, I don't mean to change the subject, but I did want to say this earlier. You've done a lot of work when it comes to Southern California, and California being the mecca for alternative religious movements. What I'm wondering is, and I think you would probably agree, but when you look at the cults like the Jesus People, and then out of them comes the Children of God with Moses David Berg and his pedophile Hollywood connected group, the Family of God, family stuff, where River Phoenix, Rose McGowan come out of this cult. I think that it's clear that the Jesus People, which spawns kind of this modern third wave charismaticism, which spawns the non-denominational movement, and then the emergent church, believe it or not, this is also roughly the origins of what's nowadays called the emergent church, which I think is a complete, total intelligence operation. There's no question about it. You look into the people who were founding figures in the emergent church, you'll find the same patterns of all the cults. It's people who had, high-level intelligence connections, CIA connections. And then, of course, when we get into more of the geopolitical stuff, we'll also see other foreign policy. We'll see kind of a Zionist element obviously involved in the premillennial type stuff. You'll see Washington's foreign policy loving the Russia is Gog and Magog stuff. But what do you think about the Pentagon, CIA having a direct link to the California cult movement and the evangelical stuff that came from it?
You're a little bit more well-read on that direct connection. Actually, when I brought up the William Engdahl stuff with Tim on the last one, I didn't talk about that with Chris, but that was only because you had told me about it.
That's cool though, because but I mean, I think you have done a lot about the alternative religious movements, and I think that all I'm saying is that the reason it might not be surprising is that California is a test bed. You've talked about that a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it all comes out of the same area. I mean, Sunset Boulevard, right at the base of Laurel Canyon.
Yeah.
Which of course is right where Lookout Mountain was, where they were faking all the nuke footage. That is ground zero for Jesus People and people walking around passing out tracts and all that type of stuff. Children of God cult. Lots of different religious cults. Kind of based around Jesus, not necessarily, they weren't Christian cults, but they were, what was the other one? The love cult was another one.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you're
Steve
talking about.
Allen's son joined them, where,
Yeah.
like everybody.
He took acid and saw himself as like this, new religious figure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, there's LSD Jesus cults.
Right. So,
The Source was another cult around that area, around that time. That kind of, it was like a guy. He had like 13 wives or something like that, and they owned a vegetarian restaurant on Sunset Boulevard. If you watch the movie Annie Hall, there's a scene where Woody Allen and Diane Keaton are eating at the Source restaurant, and that's actually owned by a CIA cult.
wow. I did not know that. Okay. So another good point that somebody mentioned in the chat, and yes, I was actually going to mention the history of the Scofield Bible. So the Scofield Bible goes back to John Nelson Darby, and Darby was in the cult Plymouth Brethren. And you might recognize another famous figure who grew up in the Plymouth Brethren named Aleister Crowley. So the Plymouth Brethren are very good at spawning other cult leaders. But yes, so there was an Anglican. The reason that Oxford prints the Scofield Bible is because there was this British imperial influence, obviously, in the printing of that Bible. Not accidental that you have the establishment of, Balfour Declaration, the establishment of the State of Israel. You need a study Bible to convince all the idiot evangelicals in America to just blindly accept that. So yes, all of that's true. Perloff has covered that for a long time, and everything that Perloff says about that's correct. I learned this, by the way, back when I was an evangelical, and I was like, holy crap. One last point, I'll let you chime back in, John. In Ingdahl's book, and I'm not saying I agree with everything in this book, but I think that he has made some good connections that a lot of other people haven't made. And I didn't actually know that Campus Crusade had this connection until he sources his claims here. It's not just him saying it, but he talks about how I'm going to read briefly. He says, one of the most influential as well as well-financed organizations is the military ministry and their affiliate, the Campus Crusade for Christ. Military ministry had an annual budget of $500 million. $500 million for Campus Crusade. That's crazy. They had a branch offices at all of the U.S. Army bases, as well as all overseas Bible study programs globally. And they are a mirror, this is wild, of Fethullah Gulen, his Quran study groups. So the Gulen network that everybody was talking about 8 months, a year ago, all the alt media was talking about him. Ingdahl is arguing that it's the exact same pattern that you see with the evangelical groups. So then he goes on to say that this was very important too in Desert Storm, and right after Desert Storm, the peak of the Iraqi insurgency, Petraeus, Steele, all of these big neocon types were openly saying, quote, "We must pursue our means for transforming the nation through the military. The military may be the most influential way to affect the spiritual superstructure of America." Thus, the military ministry inside the U.S. spread this crusader fanaticism that America is, going to war against the jihad, right? It's the Christian evangelicals. What was Bush's thing? We should go fight a jihad. Fight the jihad against the Muslims, the jihadish, the mustard gases.
Crusade.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, to give an empirical example of something backing you up is, I remember there was a conference in California. Well, there was two that I remember, but there was one, and it was a guy we'll talk about in a minute, but it was Chuck Smith, Rick Warren, all the California pastors around here, and they were meeting with Republican senators. This is around 2006, somewhere around there. But they were meeting with like Mike Huckabee and other neoconservative types at that time, and what I remember reading about it is that it was literally like a talking points meeting, and like they were discussing the church's role in propagating military you know uh, foreign policy, basically.
Exactly right. So in other words, people think we have a separation of church and state, and they have no conception of the long time marriage between the deep state, the Pentagon, and all of the biggest evangelical movements, especially. Wim Hof shows that it's also Catholicism, and I'm not denying that there are aspects of Orthodoxy that have been infected with this as well. Hence the battle over ecumenism and Orthodoxy. Ecumenism is 100% the Rockefeller CIA funded thing. But anyway, so you've got another good example there of a meeting that I didn't know about. But I think that kind of stuff is more common than we think.
Oh, very common. Yeah, that was a nothing meeting. That was just like a whatever. I mean, that stuff goes on all the time. The one that I remember the most is 2007. I used to have a photo of this, but I don't anymore. I wish I still did. I've looked for it, but it was at the Crystal Cathedral. I used to work across the street from the Crystal Cathedral in Orange.
Oh, this is
California.
great. Yeah. See, I totally forgot about Schuler and the Crystal Cathedral, but yeah, man, that's another rabbit hole. Tell us about that.
Yeah, and this one was I drive by one day and there's a banner out front and it says they're having a conference there, and speaking there was Brent Scowcroft, Henry Kissinger, and George H.W. Bush.
At the Crystal Cathedral?
At the Crystal Cathedral, they were speaking. It was a conference, and they were having pastors from Southern California.
Could you imagine Henry Kissinger speaking in tongues, like if he got Robert Schuller? It would sound like a motorboat, like like a trolling motor.
Yes, very, very, yes, very. Yes, yeah. Yes. I mean, like you're saying, yeah. These conferences are going on all the time, where these CFR members. Rick Warren's a Council on Foreign Relations member.
That's a good point. A lot of people forget that. Yeah.
Even though he's no longer the pastor, he was the pastor for a long time of Saddleback Church.
And that's the largest non-denominational church, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, biggest. Yeah, and that he hosted the Obama-McCain debate at the church.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, in the church there was actually one of the McCain-Obama debates were hosted by Rick Warren.
Wow.
In the church, like it was a church service. Go back and find the YouTube happening. So you have a Council on Foreign Relations member, pastor with two Council on Foreign Relations.
John, I'm glad to be here. Do my Barack Obama, do my Obama impersonation. We gotta change things. We gotta change things. I'm not a Marxist, by the way. Isn't that fun? Obama's a Marxist when he's like funded by all the big banks, right?
Oh yeah.
But anyway, so
we've discussed that many times about that whole scam. But yeah, the there is a long-standing relationship with evangelicals and military. I'd say since we're just specifically talking about this brand, but I'd say most churches, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, they all play into it as well. But this particular it's been going on for a while. The other thing that we're to connect this with Hal Lindsey, late great planet Earth, the coming apocalypse, the background to all of this is the Cold War. Okay.
Right.
So in the background, you have the cultural wallpaper of the Cold War that's scaring everybody. Hal Lindsey's writing in Late Great Planet Earth that the apocalypse is going to come about. You got the Gog and the Magog stuff. So it's Russia. Russia has nukes. America has nukes. They're going to nuke each other. It's going to be the apocalypse. And then Jesus is going to come back on a big nuke cloud. And he's going to, float down on the nuke cloud and save all the, the 144,000 people who were, true to what, the Jesus people, basically, who got baptized the proper way at the beach. So so yeah, I'm being a bit sarcastic about this, but that's literally what you have playing itself out.
Jesus is just all right with me. Jesus is just all right with. What's that other one? I'm gonna die to the sky, to the something in the sky. Like, huh?
Norman Greenbaum.
Yeah.
Spirit in the Sky, Norman Greenbaum. Yeah.
These are like the old version. Like, remember, like Jars of Clay kind of got some radio play, like a few years ago, back in the 90s. And then, so this is like the older version of Jars of Clay, where these kind of, aren't these Jesus, or is that the Doobie Brothers? I can't remember who sings that. The Jesus is just all right with me.
Doobie Brothers sang that song. They were popular with it, although they were a Christian band, because they were called the Doobie Brothers.
So we've almost got 200 nerds in here. This is crazy. I didn't think we would have it this early. I figured it would take a while, but okay. So I'm getting off track here. I get crazy. So we've got the CIA, the Pentagon involved in largely even. And if people ask why evangelical, well, number one, evangelicalism is a little easier, I would say, to mimic, because anybody can start an evangelical church. It's a little bit more difficult, not impossible, to infiltrate older mainline churches like Orthodoxy or Roman Catholicism. It still happens, obviously. The CIA, David Wim Hof, C.D. Jackson, that's all in Wim Hof's book. But the thing about evangelicalism is that anybody can start one of those. And so you have no idea who is starting it unless you know who this guy is and his background and so forth. And you have this just explosion. I think it's very vital to see that this is also at the time of, as you said, the Cold War and then the 60s revolution. And most people, especially from the Bible mindset, the right-wing so-called mindset, conservative mindset, if you ask them about the 60s and that revolution, and even a lot of people in the alt media, a lot of alt-right people, I'm so tired of this dumb argument, they will say, the 60s revolution, oh, that's the commies that started that. No. It's the CIA, the military, and the Pentagon that were behind that 60s countercultural revolution. And by the way, you've covered this. I'm citing Stoner Saunders's book, which is, again, yes, it's kind of watered down, but it's an academic assessment of the cultural wallpaper, as you termed it, of the Cold War and how this was the CIA. I'm not saying that there weren't bad Marxists. I hate the Frankfurt School. I hate those Marxist guys, but they were brought here by the OSS and the CIA to alter the culture. They didn't have the power and the means and ability to change the whole world through the principles of Karl Marx. So I'll shut up here after I say this. This is what I said on Twitter today when people were arguing this. You have to understand what H.G. Wells and what Bertrand Russell say. And the way H.G. Wells frames it, he says, look, you idiot Marxists. He says, global capitalism is what will bring the global Marxist technocracy. Mm-hmm. That's how Wells phrases it. He says, you idiot communists, what other means and engine do you think will bring universal monoculture aside from globo monocapitalism?
Yes. I mean, if you're a let me just say this prior to making this statement. If you're a capitalist, you're fooling yourself. If you're a communist, you're fooling yourself.
Yeah.
The capitalism that funded school and funds schools into existence employs communist academics to teach the capitalist children. Think about that one for a second.
Somebody said something really funny. I can't. Do you remember when one of the evangelical pastors who was like an advisor to Bush when he got busted with like a male prostitute and crystal meth. Do you remember him?
Yeah,
he's one of the big, yeah.
It was Ted, what's his face, out of Colorado.
Yes. Somebody said it, called it crystal Methodism. Crystal Methodist.
Crystal Methodist. Yeah, that's a good church. Actually, that sounds like a New Age church.
It was springing out of Sedona or something, right?
Worshipping crystal. Yeah, so you have yes, of course. I mean, capitalism, communism, it goes hand in hand. It's just banker Marxism. I mean, to someone like you or myself, whether you're in
Hey, John, people are asking if you could talk a little louder to the mic.
Okay.
Ted Haggard, thank you. That was it. Yeah.
Ted Haggard.
Yeah, that's better.
Does that sound better?
Yeah.
Okay. To someone like you or myself who've studied this stuff, yes, Marxism equals banks. That's it.
Right.
To somebody who hasn't studied it, who thinks there's some sort of divide between it at the top, there's not. I mean, I don't know what to tell you at this point. How could you have capitalism funding academia that's Marxist teaching capitalist kids? You see it. And if you think that you could just, somehow the country got infiltrated by Marxists with nobody knowing about it,
yeah,
it's absolutely ridiculous. It was an intelligence front, like you said, Frances Stoner Saunders' book. I think she's some sort of intelligence operative herself, but she definitely
it's a whitewash, yeah.
And it's a great source, even though it is a whitewash. And the cultural Cold War. It was abstract art, not even really abstract. It's just nihilistic art, promotion of nihilism to provide a source of apathy for the modern American. Once you get into this is another thing too, is this type of church with this change in the church was really. Another thing was brought about was to break up the old traditional methods on purpose. I think so.
To break up what now?
I think
you cut out.
The old traditional style of going to church, because the old traditional style of church kind of revolved around community and family.
Mm-hmm.
And with the new kind of way of going to church with the youth, it's all kind of youth oriented. So it's not really family.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So, and this is kind of like it mirrors how in the culture, which you've talked about. I think Alan Watt has talked about this too in a lot of his podcasts, is that you have in the culture the interjection of the idea that there are these different generations, right? That so that the young, we're the beat generation, we're the young, we don't listen to the old fogey generation, and it wasn't viewed that way. 100 years prior, everybody was in the same schoolhouse. You would have the older kids in the same schoolhouse with the younger kids, in 1890 or whatever. But as you get into the 20th century, you have a lot of this social experimentation with the idea of creating Generation X, the boomer, this splits up the groups. And I think you're saying that the church mirrors the stupid culture which was designed.
Yes, absolutely. If you're going to a church that's just full of young people, that's not including mom, dad, grandfathers, all that. It's just, you and your peers, you're creating a new culture out of that. That's youth oriented. It's breaking up the old traditional style, which was more based around community.
Right.
Here's the thing about mega churches, though. Mega churches aren't community based. Mega churches are, everybody comes from miles and miles around. And Chris and I kind of touched on this. You get lost in the crowd at the big mega church. You don't know your pastor, per se, because your pastor's got 300-400 other people he's got to deal with. There's no personal relationships. There's no personal accountability. Back in the old days, there was a Methodist church in the town I just moved from in in Southern California, Pomona, Claremont area, there's the remnants of churches basically on every street corner, because churches were neighborhood things.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so there was a Methodist church, and then 3 miles away from that, there's another Methodist church, because it was a neighborhood Methodist church. And then 3 miles away, there's another entirely different neighborhood. You see, and that neighborhood went to that Methodist church, and this neighborhood went to this Methodist church, because it was people from a close-knit, small community. When you go to the mega church, you're lost in the crowd. It's like going to a rock concert, which, interestingly enough, one of the first mega churches, Calvary Chapel in Costa Mesa, one of the things that attracted the people was the Jesus people rock music. And they specifically, starting with a band called Love Song, that was the name of the group, Love Song, they were performing live weekly at the Calvary Chapel there, and getting people to come in there with the rock music, and once again, doing away with the old traditional hymns and all that type of stuff. Now
it's so bad that actually there are Novus Ordo Catholic churches in, I think, Germany that have raves. Did you know that?
I wouldn't be.
I'm not joking. To bring, well, how do we appeal to the youth? Have a damn rave. Bring DJ Tiesto and DJ Kyoki, and let's have a rave, and we'll get the kids to come to the night Novus Ordo church. And then I was gonna say something really dirty, but I'll refrain.
Yeah, they I wouldn't be surprised, considering the 4 or 5 years that I lived out there in Pomona, Claremont area, California. My wife and I, we tried to just find a church, basically, just and I would go with her to try to just check it out. I was always interested in that aspect of it. So we'd go to Catholic churches, and the amount of charismatic Catholic churches exceeds the amount of regular Catholic churches, which
this is a very bizarre thing.
We'll finish this real quick.
Sure.
Because I'm not Catholic. I never really went to Catholic church till I met my wife, and we were blown away with, you go into a Catholic church and it's basically like going into an evangelical church, and we didn't even really know that existed. Because my wife never went to a church like that, and then we're like, what is this? There's it's like rock music, and the service is not like a Catholic service. I mean, they take communion, and they do the little Catholic prayers that the Catholics do or whatever, but the rest of it is totally formatted like like you're at the vineyard.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
that's fruits of Vatican II there, as most traditional Catholics will bitch about. But so let's bring it back to the end times and to prophecy. And so we've got the Cold War, we've got the cults, we've got the CIA, the Pentagon putting money into these different evangelical groups. And let's not forget, I know you know this, John, and feel free to comment any input you have on it, but we might have a lot of listeners and watchers who don't know that a classic front for intelligence is being a missionary. So missionaries in foreign lands, this is old school CIA fronts, intelligence agencies using this as a front. USAID, Red Cross, these are classic CIA fronts. So don't believe the stories that you see. Now, I'm not saying every missionary is a CIA agent. That's not true, but I'm saying it can and easily be a front that's used for that kind of stuff. And it has many times over. There's plenty of books and documentation on that. But we have to also include that puzzle piece, because that's a big part of understanding the Washington's foreign policy and how it likes to spread, especially Protestant Christianity, as well as Wim Hof shows Roman Catholicism, because it was part of that Cold War dialectic, because how do you fight the Soviets? Well, you have a damn Baptist church in your city. That's how.
Well, I mean, you can take it back even further if you wanted to. Just established foundation. The Jesuits were always good at paving the way for commerce.
That's a good point.
So they go into a country. Let's just say one thing I would be a quasi expert on is California. California is founded by Jesuits, and they basically paved the way for opening up of the West and the railroads and all that type of stuff by helping to civilize the Indians out there. So so on and so forth. Commerce usually follows where not only Catholicism in earlier time periods, but then in later time periods like now, evangelicism is kind of the this is easy to discuss with someone like yourself. Evangelicism is the perfect postmodern Christianity. So it can move into any area, adapt itself pretty easily.
That's a great point. Yeah.
So it paves the way for commerce, and then it paves the way for the rest of the culture, which a lot of Christians don't actually, they wouldn't actually think themselves to be, quote, to use a phraseology that Christians like to use, to be of this world.
Mm-hmm.
But yet they really are part of the culture. They really do accept a lot of the stuff that like someone like myself wouldn't. I wouldn't let my kids watch television or that type of stuff. But a lot of Christians, the type of culture that gets proliferated into the here's a perfect example. They have Muslim evangelists now.
They have Muslim evangelists. Is that what you said?
Aware of that?
You cut out there. Say that again.
Yeah, they have televangelist Muslims now.
I have heard this. I haven't seen it, but this also, by the way, is something Engdahl mentions in his book, that the success of Billy Graham was so beyond the expectations of what the CIA had in mind, that they realized all we've got to do is find the Billy Graham for the Muslim world. So that's what they were trying to do with a lot of these different characters. The Gulen guy is probably some kind of, but he's not, I don't guess, a very dynamic speaker. I don't know. But there's other kinds of people that they tried to interview. Miles Copeland in his book actually says the same thing. He says that they hoped Nasser, Gamal Abdel Nasser, would be an Islamic Billy Graham. So I'm not surprised that we're starting to see this now, because I think that does fit into the planned dialectic that they want to kind of Islamicize the West, not because they like Islam, but I see it as a long-term business plan. The globalists, I'm saying.
Sure. Yeah. And another thing I brought up on the call with Tim and Chris was that in Nicaragua during the Somoza Sandinista period, there was a guy who was like one of the leaders of the Campus Crusades in Nicaragua, and the Sandinistas caught him or something because he was carrying large sums of undeclared money.
Mm.
They were,
was it hidden under Gideon Bibles?
Yeah, he was. And basically with this article that I was reading in, it was a covert action bulletin. It was like a liberal type magazine it was basically saying that these Sandinistas had uncovered that the Campus Crusades was a CIA front, funneling money in to do that, even though I would say that the Sandinistas themselves are a CIA front. So it was more dialectic type stuff. But what you have, this is another thing that you have kind of popping up in the 70s and 80s as time progresses, and that the former Jesus people, or whoever, people being sucked into this new type of evangelicism, is this idea of that Christianity is going to fight communism. Okay, so it's not only that we have to be scared of the Cold War and we have to be scared of the nuclear apocalypse, but it's also pitting Christianity against communism directly, because communism is Satanism, and
Right.
Christian America is Christian. So Jesus equals America. Russia
Right. City on a hill. Yeah.
And Russia equals Satan. Right.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and then as we move down through the time period and you get to be guys like me and you, then you see this all played out in the plot to Rocky IV.
and in WWF, WWE, remember Ivan and Hulk Hogan?
Bolsheviks.
What's his name?
There was Boris Zukov.
Yeah,
Boris
that's
Zukov
it.
And Nikolai Volkov.
Nikolai Volkov, and then and he's wrestling Hulk Hogan.
Interestingly enough, when the Berlin Wall fell, Nikolai Volkov, if you remember, he turned on Boris Zukov, and he joined America, and he went rogue against the evil commie.
Let me say, this is another point I want to make here. Yes, everybody, I've probably had 20 people in the last few months send me the Yuri Bezmenov lecture. Now, yes, I have seen the Yuri Bezmenov lecture. It's been online going around for at least a decade or more. I'm not saying that the points that Yuri Bezmenov makes are false. So yes, there are like the Frankfurt School guys who would try to argue that if we can degrade the culture and make them relativists and so forth. But again, the real story of the Frankfurt School guys is that they were propped up by the CIA. And so even the alt-right people who get mad and bitch about the Frankfurt School people, they don't talk about the OSS and the CIA being who gave them the money to do what they were doing. Who do you think brought the Eastern Bloc people over? It was the OSS and CIA.
The Yuri Bezmenov. Bezmenov.
One last point, John. One last point. The reason I bring up the Yuri talk, and this is something that Mark Hackard has, disagree or agree with Mark Hackard or not, but he has some really good articles that he translated about defectors. And the important thing about defectors is that to whatever degree it's real or fake or staged, we don't even know the real story of these people. It could just be made up. Let's say that Yuri Bezmenov truly defected or whatever. Even if that's true, whatever comes out of Yuri Bezmenov is going to be what the CIA wants out. So defectors are great disinformation agents. They're great ways to prop up grandiose tales of the Marxist Cold War takeover. And I think that's crucial to understand that. And a lot of these, anti-Marxist and these people that are online, I'm not a Marxist, by the way, so don't even try to make that argument. But you can't trust defectors is what I'm trying to say. It just fits into the propaganda machine.
Yeah, the Yuri Bezmenov stuff never rang true to me, just because.
Could you speak up a little bit, John? People are saying they're having a hard time hearing.
I said it never rang true to me because he's basically saying all the things that the culture in America was pushing on its own people. Mm-hmm. So why would you need the Russians to do that?
Exactly. This is what's so crucial. Well stated. I rambled there for like 10 minutes trying to say what John said in like 20 seconds.
Yeah.
Another
one is Anatoly Golitsyn.
I was about to say the fall of the wall and Anatoly Golitsyn. Hey, maybe Anatoly Golitsyn knows about the fall of the wall ahead of time because the CIA is who told him that, not because he knew about the Sino-Soviet split secrets or whatever.
Yeah. And basically to a certain extent, at the top, I don't think there's any difference between Cold War KGB and Cold War CIA. So they're both working for the same paymasters. And but see, those type of things, whether it's, you know, KGB or CIA, whatever it is, they were crucial to the time period because it you know, it fueled the you know, the scary culture. You know, a great television show. I don't really watch a lot of TV, but a really interesting show to kind of show what kind of psychology was being used on people at the time is The Americans.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know,
And the CIA approves those scripts, by the way. So
sure, absolutely. But yeah, it's interesting to go back and kind of look at some of those things.
I will say real quick in the chat, we're not here to debate nukes. So the reason that some of these people are being, if you spam in here, I have the spam filter turned on and it will block the people that spam. So we're here to talk about the end times. It's not a debate on nukes. So anyway, sorry, John, go ahead.
You go ahead. There's a helicopter landing on my head.
So if I think about maybe let's talk a little bit about some of the biblical type end time stuff. So being raised in a Protestant evangelical church and then starting to read the Bible when I was 17, 18, really getting into it. Of course, everybody finds the book of Revelations fascinating. So you go and you read about the angels and the bowl judgments and the seal judgments. And it all sounds very, very wild, right? And if you're Protestant evangelical, then you know that you already kind of have just this assumption that this is all about some sort of sequence of events at the end of the world. Now, I never had that view challenged. I never questioned it until I spent a lot of time in theology and did do a period of seminary work and really got into comparative religion and all this kind of stuff. And as everybody knows, I'm not a textual liberal. So this is not coming from a vantage point of trying to, from my view, say that the Bible doesn't have any divine inspiration or veracity or anything like that. But it's very simple, actually, to kind of show that even, and this is, I would say, even if you don't believe the Bible, I think it's still demonstrably true that these verses most of the time are referring to events contemporary with the apostles. So I'm just going to run through this really quick. The easiest way to understand this is to read Luke 21. And that's because Jesus says very clearly in verse 22 that he says, these are the days of vengeance in which all things written in the prophets must be fulfilled. And if you read the entire chapter, he's talking about that generation, the Jews and the people that are right there in front of him and his apostles and disciples. And that's why he says very clearly, he says, you will see Jerusalem surrounded by enemies, right? Know then that its desolation is near. Now, whether you believe it's inspired, I believe it's inspired, but whether you do or not, about 40 years later, that happened. So that, I think, is so obvious and so clear. And I'm not saying that there's nothing mysterious about the book of Revelation or whatever, but if you look at the pattern of the book of Revelation, the way it's structured with its judgments and what it talks about, it matches the pattern of Matthew 24, which is Luke 21, right? This is the Olivet Discourse in both of those Gospels. So I think it's very clear that the book of Revelation, the Apocalypse, is talking about the same stuff that Jesus is talking about in that famous discourse. Therefore, the easiest way to approach, the clearest, I think, simplest way to approach these texts, whether you believe they're inspired or not, is to understand the historical context. And the historical context does have to do with apocalypticism of that time period. I'm not saying, by the way, that there's nothing future fulfillment for us as Orthodox or for Roman Catholics. There are the last things. There is, some events of the last times, like the final judgment, the resurrection of the body, these kinds of things. But we don't have this elaborate scheme that's all kind of drawn up like, John Hagee, here's my Bible prophecy church. The blood moons will cover Israel. the blood moon, the I was trying to think of the blood moon pies. When I eat the blood moon pies, you'll know the end is near. That is literally how dumb John Hagee's shit is. But anyway, so we don't have charts, we don't have these like elaborate schemes because we don't know that. It's not told to us. So when we get towards the end, I'll give, if I get this question a lot, I've not yet got to a point where I have the time to really, from my perspective, write an article. I do have an old article about the temple and Josephus that people could read if they want, Matthew 24 and Josephus compared. And you can find that in the archives. But also, I'll list a couple short books that people could read if they want to go down that route, because I do get a lot of messages about, what do you think about the end times? What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I will say, too, that, again, the Orthodox Study Bible notes, they get it perfectly right. It's the first time there's ever been a study Bible that actually understands that these texts are talking about 70 AD. Now, there are aspects that do refer to future realities, but if you read my Daniel article, if you look at what the Orthodox Study Bible says in the Daniel notes, if you look at Daniel, it's talking about the same thing Jesus is talking about. And it's talking about what happened in the first century. And it removes a lot of this nonsense, which is a perfect tool for the state, for the Pentagon, for the CIA, for social engineers to concoct nonsense to fool a bunch of dummies. And they do the same thing with Muslims. Evangelicals are used the exact same way Muslims are. John, your comments?
Yes.
We're up to 2:30. We're up to 2:30. Let's see if we can. We're doing good. So go, John.
Yeah. Well, your thing with the Bible verses and all that. Like I said, I'm not an organized religion person.
That's cool, but I mean, you give your perspective on the end times and you being manipulated through the fear.
Sure. Well, I mean, an interesting thing just to note about Apocalypse. Calypso kept Odysseus on a island, detained, and Calypso means to cover. So she's the goddess who keeps Odysseus on the island, detaining him on an island. It's interesting that the story of John the Revelator, he's on an island being detained, and he's talking about the apocalypse, the calypse, the uncovering. So interesting correlation there.
Are you doing a little bit of Jordan Maxwell for us, John?
That's all John Adams research there. Not no.
Of course, if you understand the apocalypse is clearly discussing the pterodactyls coming down through the hell portal gates into my backyard to initiate the end times as the beast.
The real Bible is you have to go to the Geneva Bible, Jay. That's the thing. The Geneva Bible.
The Geneva Bible.
That's the Geneva. No, yeah. So, but yeah, I think with a the story of the Revelations and it can always be used no matter what time period it was. It was used in the Civil War. It was used in World War I.
That's a good point.
Hitler was the beast.
Yeah. There were even in the 80s they were saying Reagan was.
Reagan's the beast. Obama was the beast.
When I was a kid, barcodes. That was barcodes on all products are the mark of the beast.
Absolutely. UPC symbols are, I actually used to have a Christian book that had like little cartoon drawings in it of like people getting barcodes put on their heads, and that you were going to walk around with a UPC symbol barcode on you tattooed on your forehead.
I've seen like inmates that literally have UPC symbol tattoos.
People would do that. I remember that in the 90s too, when people would get barcodes tattooed on them to show that.
That's right. It was a thing in the 90s. Yeah.
Antichrist. So, which I'm not an atheist by any means of the word, but people definitely go to the extreme to show how much they despise religion, which I do not despise religion or religious beliefs. But the thing of it is the evangelical culture primarily is based around a rapture. Now, there has been many people who have predicted raptures, including Chuck Smith. He predicted that the rapture was going to happen New Year's Day, 1981, and then nothing.
And Hal Lindsey had an 1988 prediction.
Yep. So they've all had these predictions, and so they've had to go back and rewrite the idea of it, saying, so before it was going to be a pre-apocalypse rapture, and then later it was going to be a post, we're going to have to live through the tribulation because people are starting to see, the signs of the new world order, or whatever, people want to call it. And they're realizing they're going to have to actually live through some of these things that they believe are going to correlate with the book of Revelation. So they've come to the conclusion that they will actually have to live through the tribulation to make it through to the rapture. But during the 1960s and 70s, everybody was pretty convinced that the rapture was going to happen. And interestingly enough, there was movies made.
Yes, good point.
That went along with this and showed people, and it was actually proved. In fact, there was a movie made of the late great planet Earth that was narrated by Orson Welles.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, you could look that up on YouTube. It's awesome. I mean that
like awesomely bad, right?
It's awesomely, it's good bad.
Yeah.
Another good bad one is A Thief in the Night, and you can watch that for free on YouTube too. And that's the one that scared the crap out of me as a kid. Watching that, there's people getting guillotined. There's the rapture comes and people are disappearing in their cars on the freeway, and traffic's at a standstill because people have
Yeah. You know what I just watched a couple nights ago, and this probably fits into that. Is this like the 70s?
Yeah.
Okay. The Omen, which I put on the show banner, that's 70s. And I forgot that there's this really funny part. Anytime Hollywood tries to do apocalypse end time stuff, they make up Bible quotes every time in a movie. It's in tons of them. It's in End of Days. It's in
Seventh Sign.
Yes, Seventh Sign with Demi Moore. Anyway, so I'm watching The Omen, and Gregory Peck starts. Gregory Peck gives birth to the Antichrist, and he starts reading Bible verses, and he makes up this Bible verse that doesn't exist, and it's like, and he shall unite the entire European continent, and there shall be a comet that crosses the sky. That's literally what it says, and I'm sitting here thinking, that is the dumbest. Like, did none of them read the Bible at all?
No, I think he was actually reading out of the late great planet Earth, not the
Bible. Oh, I bet he was.
Yeah. The late great planet Earth is a great movie, because if you read the book and you're cracking up at the fact that he's literally going through scriptures, and he's saying that when Ezekiel's talking about the armies, and then Hal Lindsey goes down at the bottom after he quotes the scripture from Ezekiel, he said, obviously, he says obviously the scripture is referring to the Russians and their nuclear capability, and he's literally saying in there that Ezekiel and Daniel are talking about Russians having nukes.
Yeah, and it's I remember a video back when I was an evangelical where Hal Lindsey said that he was still doing the Russia thing, and he was saying that when John in the Apocalypse talks about the plagues, and this is when Russia lets loose the nukes, and then when it talks about the scorpions, which in the text are demonic spirits, John's seeing the spiritual realm, Hal Lindsay says those are Black Hawks because they have metal bodies, and he says they're Black Hawk helicopters.
Yeah, I think what he was actually referring to was when he was talking about Scorpions, is the band the Scorpions when they made that song "The Winds of Change" when the Berlin Wall fell.
Okay. Well, yeah, the wall falling and letting, that would be an action of Satan.
Yeah,
the delusion of Anatoly Golitsyn, right? And the commies are tricking us by the wall falling. Yeah.
So
we're getting up towards 250. That's pretty good for live.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it.
We just jumped up to 240. So if you're new, if you just clicked into the stream, this is Jay Dyer from Jay's Analysis. We're talking to John Adams of Hoaxbusters Call. If you followed us at all, if you're familiar with you, then I'm sure you've heard us talking together. We've been podcasting and interviewing for the last couple years, and this discussion we've gotten into some of the historical characters who played a vital role in end times manipulation in the American bureaucracy, the Pentagon, the CIA, these different entities utilizing evangelical groups. John, you went through some of the key figures like Bill Bright, and we talked about the neocons and Rumsfeld. Do you have any more figures that kind of come to the fore, like not necessarily Hal Lindsey, but anybody in that vein that you think has a clear connection to being not what they appear?
Sure. Oh yeah. Paul Kane.
Okay, tell us about him. I'm not familiar. Who's Paul Kane?
Paul Kane. You could look him up on your Wikipedia right now, and he was a minister. But he was also, interestingly enough, he worked for the CIA.
Oh, okay.
In the paranormal division of the CIA.
So spies and Stanford research type stuff.
Yeah, I cannot find any other information except for that currently on Mr. Kane. But here's the interesting thing about Paul Kane working for the CIA in the paranormal division. He had a protege, and his protege is a man by the name of Charles Smith, who goes by Chuck Smith. Chuck Smith went to start one of the biggest mega churches to basically begin, and that would be Calvary Chapel.
Calvary Chapel, you cut out there.
Calvary Chapel Ministries.
Okay.
That's Chuck Smith's ministry. He started in Costa Mesa, California in 1968, somewhere around there.
I think Dave touches on this in Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon a little bit.
I don't recall that, but
there's the brief mention of Calvary Chapel, and because one of the, maybe not Chuck Smith, but one of the Laurel Canyon people was instrumental in the early phases of the rise of Calvary Chapel. I can find it. Go ahead.
I'm trying to think who it was, but in any case, so Chuck Smith, Chuck Smith has an interesting history of himself, because he used to teach at a Foursquare church in Santa Ana, the Foursquare Church of the Gospel in Santa Ana, and then all of a sudden he decides that he doesn't want to be part of that ministry anymore, because he claimed he had a vision from God, and the vision from God that he had told him that he would be leading thousands of people to God. And that was his vision that God gave him, and so he decided to leave his gig as a minister of the Foursquare Gospel Church in Santa Ana and decide to take over the Calvary Chapel ministry, and he was able to turn it into basically one of the first mega churches.
Wow.
And like I said, his mentor was a CIA operative for the paranormal of the CIA. So he ended up being on, Time Magazine. When they had the Jesus People Time Magazine article, they interviewed him.
Wow.
If you watch the Jesus People documentary from the 60s, it features Chuck Smith when he's baptizing people at the beach in Corona del Mar, California.
This is gold information here, people. I hope you appreciate this.
Yes. So he was instrumental in the rise of this type of stuff. I got nothing against people getting baptized at the beach. I mean, my parents were baptized by Chuck Smith at the beach in California.
Mm-hmm. Shill, CIA shill. Real quick though, let me remind the audience that if you want us to read your questions, we have, I think, 4 or 5 super chats that have come in. I'm not just asking for shekels. I don't care what amount you put. But if you would like us to read the questions as we near the end of the discussion, just send the super chat, because as you know, the chats disappear. They're going nonstop. I can't read all these chats while I talk to John. So if you want your super chat to appear at the end, which those remain listed, if you want us to answer a question about theology, about some of the people that John's talking about, some of the books you might want to hear the names so that you could get the book or whatever, send a super chat anywhere from 2 up to 70 zillion Bitcoins, and we will take them. Go ahead, John.
Yes, please donate to Jay or myself. We do a lot of research and we put it all out there, so it takes a lot of time, and we're very grateful for it as well. So this is, like I was saying, I got nothing against people getting baptized at the beach. I mean, when I was involved, I got baptized in the pool in the backyard.
You're saying that Chuck Smith brought a bunch of olive oil and dumped it on your head in a pool, in a kiddie pool, and the CIA anointed you to be their boy. That's what you're saying.
Luckily I was not anointed by or baptized by Chuck Smith. So
that was before you got. That was before you went to the Benny Hinn.
The
Benny Hinn show.
There's another character there. Anyways, like I said, this is another interesting thing, and there's a lot of information that kind of correlates. It's kind of hard to articulate it and get it all in there, but you have to think about this time period too. So Costa Mesa, California, 1968. The landscape around this area is very conservative.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very conservative landscape. This is where some of the biggest military contractors in the world were located. Orange County, colloquially for many years, was known as the Orange Curtain.
And this is where we're going to get Silicon Valley too, right?
Absolutely, yeah. The Orange Curtain. The reason it was known as the Orange Curtain is because there was so many. It was like almost like 95% right-wing conservatives lived in Orange County in the 1960s and 70s. And so it's very interesting in the beginning of this postmodern time period that a postmodern kind of evangelicism made up of primarily ex-hippies and ex-drug users that are being moved into what would later be the religion that would help to bring about Ronald Reagan and super militarization, just happens to come out of this area. High concentration of military industrial complex and John Birch Society type stuff. So that to me is very interesting.
That is interesting.
All that stuff kind of correlates. It's also interesting to note that within a 10 to 15 mile radius, you have some of the biggest churches in the world all right there. So literally across the freeway from Calvary Chapel is TBN.
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
Okay.
And by the way, there was documents that were out a while back. They may not be legit, but I mean, come on, it's not hard to believe. But there was like FBI documents about Paul Crouch running a bunch of. Hey, Paul Crouch had some connection to the mafia, is what this was that came out 3 or 4 years ago. It was a big news story for a little while, and then it disappeared. I'm not saying that means the FBI was good. I mean, the CIA and the mafia and these people like Paul Crouch. I mean, they're like all joined at the hip. So it's not. I'm not trying to defend institutions. I'm just saying that's very believable. Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, the one interesting story that Jordan Maxwell has is that he had a friend who worked at a Balboa Beach, which is in Newport Beach, liquor store that used to deliver liquor to Paul and Jan Crouch's parties. So Paul and Jan Crouch would have parties with liquor at them. Interesting. It was also rumored that Paul Crouch.
I think she spilled some of that purple drink in her hair, dude.
Yeah, it's purple stuff.
She's got cotton candy hair.
Yeah, it's also rumored Paul Crouch was a closet homosexual.
Right.
So yeah, TBN, down the street from TBN, you're down the freeway from TBN is Saddleback Church.
Wow.
Down just a little bit north of those churches is the Crystal Cathedral with Robert Schuller. Just a little bit near over across the way near Disneyland is the Vineyard.
Holy crap, dude. This is like Petri dish.
Yeah, literally across the street, directly across the street from Disneyland, there used to be a church that was very popular in the 70s and 80s. It was called Melodyland. And that was a staple of kind of hippie or not hippie, but more Jesus people kind of evangelical stuff comes out of Melodyland. And then when you get up into Los Angeles, like I said before, you get all those other types of churches. The ones slipping, but slipping my mind. But the Campus Crusades for Christ comes from UCLA. That's where Bill Bright started the Campus Crusades for Christ at the campus of UCLA. Henrietta Mears lived in Bel Air, which is right above UCLA. And this is all in and around Hollywood. So very, very interesting that all this type of stuff correlates around Hollywood, military industrial complex, intelligence agencies. You've got the same old stuff here, basically, is what I'm saying. And like I mentioned, the Crystal Cathedral, Robert Schuller, he kind of plays a little role in this kind of. Another thing that pops its head up with evangelicism is
real quick, John. Let me ask you while we're on the topic of Schuller and all that garbage. If I recall, didn't you at one time make the point about the New Thought, positive thinking movement, Norman Vincent Peale? Didn't that have some kind of deep state connection to, or at least some social engineering money? And because that's what Robert Schuller is just like a window dressing quote Christianity version of Norman Vincent Peale stuff, right?
Yeah, actually, I was just about to say prosperity gospel.
Yeah,
pops its stuff up with Robert Schuller.
And you talked about New Thought, right? I mean, is that connected to this?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
If you go on Robert Schuller's wiki page, if it's still there in its same form, it says he's a motivational speaker. So I thought that was funny.
Did you hear my Jordan Peterson thing? I was saying that Jordan Peterson is Tony Robbins and Milo in the body of a young Vincent Price.
I saw that.
Okay.
I did.
Yeah, that's gonna make everybody mad, but that's okay. But anyway, so go ahead.
Yeah, I listened to your critique. It was very interesting and good. So Robert Schuller, he also plays a big role in kind of this shifting and changing, time period of religion. He had a drive-in movie theater that he converted into a church.
Wow, really?
The Crystal Cathedral used to be a drive-in movie theater. He would actually have people drive in, and he would be on the loudspeaker with the boxes in the cars, like in the movie theater, back in the drive-ins.
That is insane.
Yeah, and so he had that, and then he built the Crystal Cathedral, or the first, what was it called? The Tower of Hope.
Tower of Hope.
He built the Tower of Hope. But
what a gay name, dude!
I always want to call it the Tower of Power because he had
Power Hour.
Yeah. That's Joyce Riley.
Oh, yeah. Well, all these people are interchangeable. It's all the same bullshit.
His was called the Hour of Power.
Oh.
Yeah. So, okay. Another thing that kind of correlates with the changing, with the modernization of Christian religion, which I always think is quite hilarious, because we've talked about this a little bit before on some of our, I think when we were talking about ecumenicism, was Schuller employed Richard Neutra to build the Tower of Hope, and then he employed Philip Johnson to build the Crystal Cathedral, which those are the most modernist architects.
Yeah, right. That's a good point.
Of the time period. So he employs these modernist architects to build this church. And the Crystal Cathedral, if you go look at it from the front angle, it's an upside down pyramid. Right. So it's got this kind of odd shape, but the front part of it is an upside down triangle. So the cathedral itself bears no resemblance to anything having to do with the church whatsoever.
Right. That's a good point.
So yeah, you're absolutely correct. He was a part of the prosperity gospel, the New Thought, kind of a continuation of the Norman Vincent Peale.
And Norman Vincent Peale, if I recall, was a high-level Mason. He was either a 32 or 33 degree Freemason.
So was Schuller.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Norman Vincent Peale was Rockefeller funded.
Oh, okay.
He had Rockefeller money kind of backing him up too. I think he was from New York, if I'm remembering correctly. Don't quote me on that, but when you get back into the there's a good book on this. Kate Bowler's book. It's called Blessed.
Okay.
A history of prosperity gospel. People should check that out. There's another one called The Charismatic Century. People could go back and read that, and kind of goes into the history of the like the Azusa Street revival.
Yes, right.
All that type of stuff. That's another thing. I didn't bring this up with Tim, but I'll bring it up with you. That's another interesting thing about California, is it's home to one of the biggest Christian universities in the world, is Azusa Pacific.
I don't know about this.
Azusa Pacific University is a very large Christian institution. I believe it's a non-denominational university.
Oh, okay. So it's is it charismatic in the tradition of the Azusa Street Revival giant school?
I would tend to think so. I didn't, I don't know that for a fact, but I just know that there's not really any sort of, usually you go, you have religious universities, there's some sort of denomination attached to it.
Right.
Southern Methodist, Southern Baptist, or, Catholic universities or whatever. Azusa Pacific is a non-denominational Christian, like a Christian university. And it basically kind of correlates with a kind of no sort of denomination, kind of the evangelical university. Another guy who actually lived in California and died in Newport Beach was Oral Roberts.
I was about to bring up Oral Roberts University.
Yeah, which many of today's big time pastors actually graduated from Oral Roberts University.
Yeah.
And so Oral Roberts was there to churn out the next wave.
He was churning out the Kenneth Copelands and these kind of guys.
Yeah, I think Benny Hinn go to Oral Roberts University?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe even T.D. Jakes did, or something like that. One of the black guys did. Something like that. I can't remember.
So, have you got any more juicy? I mean, this is great. There's a lot of juicy nuggets. We've still got 230 people watching. If you want us to move into the question period, do send a super chat here and we'll read your question. Looks like we got a good bit of the atheist types in the chat here. The crimes in the Bible, genocide in the Bible. Yeah, I'll be glad to eventually do those topics. That's not what we're here to talk about tonight, but that's okay.
I'm not. I didn't come on here to debate the Bible.
Yeah, this is not like atheist night. What we're here to talk about is the social engineering behind the end time stuff. And then when we finish talking with John, I will give some of my book recommendations for people that, want to delve deeper into this topic. And I'm going to recommend, readable size books, not giant things, for people that want to get my perspective on it, because I get that question a lot. So we do have some super chats here. Are they any good questions, or are they just chats? Send more mammon. That is a good statement, but not exactly a question. The Big Brother fart analogy made me pee myself laughing. Well, I'm glad I could make you pee and laugh at the same time. Increase John's audio. We did that. So here's one. How do UFOs tie into the apocalypse? That's a good question. I don't actually think that UFOs are part of the apocalypse. I think that it's possible that maybe there could be some kind of strange phenomena at the end days or something like that. But I don't think that we know when the end days is. I think that as it gets closer to that time period, it'll be evident. But I don't think that there are aliens that are flying around in space and watching us or anything like that. So that would be my response to that question. We got a couple more here.
Can I answer that question?
Yeah, John. Yeah, sure. Feel free.
There was a movement in the 60s and 70s to tie Jesus to aliens.
Okay. Talk about that.
Into the 1980s, this idea that Jesus is going to come in a spaceship.
Mm-hmm.
There's a song out there, a song I really like a lot. It's called UFO. It's by Jim Sullivan, and it's literally a song about Jesus coming down in a spaceship. I think Spirit in the Sky kind of has been kind of used in that way in pop culture to kind of imply that Jesus is like, don't they use Spirit in the Sky in like Apollo 13 or something? So it's kind of
that's a good point.
To NASA and space. The idea. This is a theosophical idea as well, because
good point.
Blavatsky specifically talks about how Jesus is one of the space brothers, and
good point. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Exotheology
is a classic attempt of cults. And if you heard the interviews with James Kelly in the Cult series, the Nation of Islam has the exotheology alien element. Scientology has the exotheology alien element. Jim Jones, actually, People's Temple had the alien exotheology element. So that's a very smooth. The Raelians, I mentioned them in my book. That's a very smooth transition from Jesus to the Space Brothers, and the CIA has been involved in that for a long time.
And there's other elements of that too. I mean, to a certain extent, like Mormons are all into transhumanism.
That's a good point.
Spaceships and all that type of stuff. I would say that there's other pop culture stuff that kind of implies that Jesus is a space brother and flying in the UFO. On Danikin, Sitchin.
Yeah, and well, I mean, the rapture idea is kind of in the same principle here. Like, remember Heaven's Gate? Heaven's Gate was another exotheology, and they thought they were going to get raptured. And
so you have this this kind of stuff actually kind of making its way into pop culture, because I think a lot of the ancient aliens type stuff would imply, like, I think what that type of stuff tries to do is, whereas you get there's the people out there who say, and I'm not disagreeing with some of this stuff, but let's just say I'm just going to be objective about the information. So there's the people who would say that Muhammad or Jesus never existed in history, right? And then there's the people who would say, well, they existed, but they were the ancient aliens. They were sent here by the ancient aliens. They, when the ascension, Jesus's ascension was him being beamed up by a UFO, and Giorgio Tsoukalos can prove this, right? So I'm sure that this type of stuff, plus all that type of stuff, they'll go into other religions, like the Hindu karma wheel is actually a UFO, right?
Yes, good point. Yeah, the wheels of Ezekiel become giant spaceships, and that's also the Hindu chariot, right?
Yeah. So Ezekiel saw a spaceship. Elijah went up in a spaceship, right? It was a chariot, but because, well, I mean, come on, Jay, they didn't know what UFOs looked like back then. They just saw,
right. Just like Hal Lindsey says that the Apostle John, didn't know what a Black Hawk was. So if John saw a Black Hawk, he would describe it as a giant scorpion with a metal body. So
let me tell you something. There's a Black Hawk coming down on my house right now. I'm not kidding. It's been following me all night ever since we started doing this broadcast.
Vintage Alex there. This is old. This is like 1998 Alex when he was doing America Destroyed by Design. Remember that one?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Saw it many times.
Okay.
Yeah.
We got two more questions here. We got a couple super chats. Pepe. Wonder who Pepe is. Pepe Keck, the frog god. Malachi Martin said the Soviet Union faked its own death. Yes. If you go back when the show is archived after we finish tonight, you'll hear we did for a section cover defectors. We mentioned Anatoly Golitsyn, and we mentioned Yuri Bezmenov, and we mentioned him in the context of being skeptical of defectors. And so Malachi Martin, I would say, is just as dubious as these same kinds of characters. If you read Keys of This Blood, it's all about fostering the Cold War. Malachi Martin's whole thing is the commies are going to get us. The commies are going to get us. That's who's infiltrating the church. He never mentions that he was probably CIA and all of his CIA buddies that were commandeering that church. As David Wimhoff shows emphatically, dogmatically, without any doubt, it's 100% proven in his book. So I don't trust defectors. It's a great engine of CIA disinformation, defector stories. So we did cover that. You can just listen to it later. John, any comments on that question?
I own The Jesuits by Malachi Martin, but I've never read it, and I've never read any of his other books. So I have no comment.
Next question is, do you know about Robert Weber and the convergence movement? Yeah, trying to bring evangelical, charismatic, and traditional style liturgies together. Yes, in fact, I remember when I first started seeing this trend about 10 years ago, I started researching the history of the emergent church, which I guess maybe now it's convergent church, and all this stuff does it. The names don't matter. It's the same kind of thing. And yeah, it's a kind of a way to try to draw people out of as we talked about at the beginning of the conversation, more traditional movements into new fads. And so the corporations, even the CIA, the Pentagon, they all experiment with these different flavors of movements to draw people and test, in these different things. And all of these big mega churches are 100%, government run stuff. And so Alex Jones is right about that part. But yes, we did earlier on, we did mention the emergent church movement, and we did talk about it having connections to the deep state. So John, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think what happens is over time, whatever it may be, people start to kind of go back to, they get tired, the mega church type stuff. It's going to run its course. So people might kind of go back to something earlier, like maybe look for some more traditional type stuff. In fact, I actually saw a Presbyterian pastor kind of talking about this, how they had kind of kept their worship service in line with what original worship services were. And he was expecting that there was going to be a reemergence of that old type of worship, because people were going to tire of, Joel Osteen and all that type of stuff. But I think what happens is in the course of people kind of looking for more traditional type stuff, they'll try to kind of circumvent that with an invented traditional. I don't know how to explain myself thoroughly, but it's like someone will go looking for a traditional type of something, but it'll be a reinvented type of thing. And I think with what she's talking about, I'm sorry, I don't know. Was it a lady?
It was a guy. It was Adam asked that question.
Oh, Adam asked that question. Okay, sorry, Adam. I thought it was Eve. Just kidding. That was bad. Yeah, with the Robert Weber and all. Yeah, that's what you're going to see is kind of a merging of I guess philosophies, a merging of theologies into kind of this mishmash, postmodern. Hey.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. The emergent church movement is completely postmodern, and the postmodernists were also CIA funded. You can read about the French theorists, the Derrida, these different characters. They also had CIA backing. That will be in my book as well. So we've gone almost 2 hours. We're getting, numbers are dropping a little bit. Maybe we need to come to the end here. John, I'm going to let you have the final concluding remarks. If you've got any more nuggets that you want to kind of throw out before we, yes, Foucault, exactly. Thank you, Trevor. Foucault was definitely one of these gay Jesuit occultists who stared over the abyss. But anyway, John, you got any more nuggets before we kind of move to the conclusion here?
Calvary Chapel had a pastor, and he was kind of Chuck Smith's right-hand man, and he was a long-haired, bearded hippie type, and his name was Lonnie Frisbee.
I've heard this one. Yeah, this is a good one.
He was a young man, and he basically kind of looked like Jesus. And so he went around kind of recruiting, people, getting all the young people to come in and join the church and come to the service and the whole bit. There's a documentary on Lonnie Frisbee you can find and watch. And Lonnie Frisbee was, the whole time he was a pastor at Calvary Chapel, he was a alcoholic, drug-using homosexual.
Wow. Okay.
And people at the church even knew this, but they covered it up. And there's even an interview with somebody from that documentary. It may have even been Chuck Smith Jr., where he was saying, Lonnie would come in and he, you could tell he'd been partying the night before. But you could just tell that when he stepped into that church, the Holy Spirit was with him, and he was alive, and he was able to, fire people up. And I was just, thinking about how funny
Mhm.
that this went on for many, many years, where this guy, even into the 1980s, where he cut his hair, and um, this type of stuff goes on for a long time. And interestingly enough, Paul Kane, Chuck Smith's mentor,
Mhm.
had been accused of being a homosexual alcoholic as well. So
Oh,
this
okay.
kind of stuff seems to be rampant amongst these type of ministries.
That's a great point. Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. A lot of these people seem to be very morally compromised individuals. So, I mean, it's not like we're just talking. I mean, we all obviously have sins. The point is not to nitpick, but that it really seems to be a lot of these big name megastar evangelicals seem to have this compromising aspect in their background and in their makeup.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing if a mechanic is a closet homosexual alcoholic,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
if you're a pastor, that's a little different there. Um, that's quite a compromise. So yeah, you see this trend kind of run through there, and the biggest thing I think overall is, one, you have this culture. It's born out of this background that the apocalypse is going to happen. Jesus is coming. He's returning any day now. It doesn't happen. It continues on into the 80s.
Mhm.
And as we move into the 80s, a base has been created for the election of Ronald Reagan. Okay.
Right.
And then you move on into the 1980s with the Council for National Policy, and a literal foundation and base as a religion has been created as a political arm. Okay, now you have a religion that is a political arm of Republican politics.
Yeah.
Okay, this is something that didn't happen in any previous time period.
Mhm. That's a
Okay.
good point. Yeah. So, and this is why we see the dominance of the neoconservative foreign policy mindset in the evangelical world, especially, as you said, in that Reagan era moral majority crowd, Falwell type crap.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was set up from the 60s to become this political arm.
Mhm.
And I would even speculate, I can't prove it, but I would even speculate that they may have even had Reagan picked out for this.
Yeah.
You
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. I mean,
know,
Reagan was probably compromised. In fact, remember Chapman that used to come on Alex Jones's show? And
Bob Freeman.
Bob, yeah, he would always talk about that he knew that. I'm not. This doesn't prove it, but I'm saying he was always talking about how he knew that Reagan was compromised.
Sure.
Alex doesn't play that clip anymore, but but you can find that one.
Yeah. So as it moves into the 80s, the other thing it successfully does is, and I have the empirical background to be able to say this, is it moved these people who were kind of, and this type of Christianity, morphed as it went down through time, because that's what postmodernism has to do.
Right.
Has to constantly reinvent itself. So it moved people that were outside. So this kind of separation of family and tradition, you break it up with youth movements and say, hey, all this stuff that these people are doing in the modern world, which you could make an argument that it wasn't great. Okay, let's just say the nuclear family and the modernization. All right, it's not that great. Okay, but whatever. You break it up. You take the youth away from them. You get parents and children at odds with each other. You create this youth movement. They break away. They say, hey, we don't want anything to do with the technology and the modern. We're going to go out here in the woods, and we're going to grow our hair long and all that type of stuff. Whether it was evangelical religion, or whether it was New Age stuff or whatever it is, you get them back into these ideas, and then by the 1980s, you're able to move them back into the modern world.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I saw that with my parents. My parents, they were kind of like, oh, we're not going to eat General Mills. We're not going to drink Coca-Cola. You're not going to watch television. You're not going to do. And then by the time the mid 80s starts to roll around, my parents, it's like, okay, we can eat McDonald's now. Hey, we can have soda. All right, cool. Hey, I can watch I can watch some MTV sometimes. It starts getting a little lenient as and the church itself moves into that phase too, because literally, I'm not kidding, Jay, and you may have heard, but by the time I was in high school, there were Christian death metal bands.
Yeah, that still exists. I have a friend who's into that. He really likes those. So that still exists, which is very bizarre, but
whatever anybody likes is none of my business, but it's just funny.
It is funny, and I think he thinks it's funny too, but yeah.
It's just funny to think about it, that the stuff that well, I mean, even when we were younger, there's Christian heavy metal bands, Striper and all that.
Striper.
So Christianity was mimicking all of the stuff that they said
pop culture, right?
Pop culture but it's just, instead of saying "Hail Satan," it's "Hail Jesus."
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We've got.
So
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to kind of wrap it up there.
Okay. Go ahead.
Is that you have this kind of religion born of this, apocalyptic nature with the background of the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
It's all going on in it's all starting in Southern California, in an area that's centered around intelligence and military industrial complex.
Right.
Right. Kind of right-wing politics. And it succeeded in creating a foundational base for moving the right-wing politics forward into the 1980s with the election of Ronald Reagan, the creation of the Council for National Policy, which was started by Tim LaHaye, who later wrote the Left Behind series that is so popular.
Great point.
Which is more apocalyptic nonsense. And interestingly enough, the Council for National Policy actually LaHaye has stated that his idea was to create a Christian Council on Foreign Relations.
Yeah, a so-called right-wing CFR, for those that don't know, right?
Yeah, so yes, and Tim LaHaye actually wrote a book with Hal Lindsey.
Yeah, I know.
So
I wish we could leave Tim LaHaye and his people behind. Can we just leave them behind?
Right, yeah. You want to know what's hilarious? If you go on Tim LaHaye's wiki page, it was changed like in December.
Mm-hmm.
If you go on there, there's a quote from him about the Illuminati. I'm not kidding. Somebody just put it in there in December. It says like, Tim LaHaye believed that there was an Illuminati who controlled the world, and that I'm serious.
Yeah, and that's all the left-wing CFR people, right?
It's a liberal Illuminati that wants to, get rid of the neocons.
All right, we got a couple more questions here, and then we'll wrap it up. I'll give some book recommendations. I guess this one is for me. Are there any suspected CIA promoted heresies in the Orthodox Church? Yeah, I cover this. Actually, the best overall topic for that I've done already is the talk that I did with John and Chris, and I think I titled it "Mystery Babylon and Ecumenism and Public Education." That talk's still popular. It gets like 100 views every few days. It's up in the 10,000 or so views. That one's really good. It's really in depth. I go into the history of ecumenism and really this the main battle of the Orthodox Church in the 20th century is ecumenism. This is the battle in any of the churches and religions, basically. And so, yes, I think that 100%. Wim Hof shows it. Many other people have shown it. The Rockefellers created, fostered, and funded that move. I mean, it wasn't totally the Rockefellers, but eventually they're the ones that made it what it is. So that's who's behind ecumenism, and that would be my answer to that question.
Let me just say this.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
For anybody who wants to hear something funny, there's a book written by a Marxist. Her name is Holly Sklar. And it is an expose of the Trilateral Commission. It's called Trilateralism. Okay, so remember, she's a Marxist. And in it is a whole bunch of stuff saying how bad and evil David Rockefeller is and how bad trilateralism is. In the beginning of the book, in the foreword, she thanks the World Council of Churches.
Yeah, this would be like Gorbachev, like criticizing the Rockefellers and then being like this megastar at the United Nations. Yeah, that's a great point, John. Yeah, that I think that sums it up. So yes, the recent even the Russian bishops, many of them had commented recently on the Council of Crete, which is intended to be the Vatican II for Orthodoxy last year, and it totally failed because most of Orthodoxy had no interest in going to a giant ecumenical conference. So that the Council of Crete failed, and that was 100% funded by NATO and the West. Next question for me: what are my thoughts on the certain group? I'm not going to name this group. I don't want to give them attention and traction. I had an email exchange with this person a long time ago. We're not going to go there for various reasons. So there will not be a debate with them for that reason. And the other part of this question, what do I think about end times and whatever they're into now? Any group, I'll just say this, any group or person that at one time predicts the end of the world. Okay, so like we were talking about earlier with John, when John was making the point about how Lindsay, if you come to these topics from a biblical perspective, there's the injunction in Scripture, for example, that you'll know a false prophet when the things that they predict don't come true. That's kind of a basic rule of thumb for false prophets and teachers. So any of these groups out there that are claiming to know when the end is and this kind of stuff, and it doesn't happen, and this group has done this many times. So that's why I don't associate with any of those groups. I'm not going to waste my time debating them. They're very ridiculous. So that is my answer to this group.
There's a ministry called End Times Prophecy. Have you ever heard of that?
Not specifically that, no. What is that?
Oh, yeah, you should check that out. It's pretty funny.
Okay.
There's a ministry called End Times Ministries.
All right, this is we still got a couple hundred to 250 people. If this is your last chance for any super chats or questions before we wrap this up, or put them in there if you want to get on here before we go. I'm going to give you a couple books, and you can have a few seconds to type out your question if you got another question, and then we'll let John wrap things up, and that'll be it for tonight. So people have asked just easy books on the view of the apocalypse in Matthew 24 that I take that I think would make things very much more manageable, much more sensible. It actually makes the Bible a lot more coherent. A good place to start would just be the little easy book. This was actually written a long time ago by a guy named Peter Holford, who I think is a Protestant, and it's just called The Destruction of Jerusalem. And it's about the text of Matthew 24, basically, just showing that so much of this matches up to what Josephus talked about, that it's very hard to try to extend this into a bunch of crazy stuff in Palestine in the year 2000 relating to Norman Schwarzkopf and Desert Storm. It has nothing to do with that. The next book I would recommend, it's a little bit more difficult, but still an easy read, a couple hundred pages. You can still get this book on Amazon. This is David Chilton's book, Great Tribulation. This is a good one. It's a real clear 200-page book on the idea of the tribulation in the Bible. And again, how so much of this actually matches up to fulfillments of predictions about 70 AD. Very simple, very straight to the point. If you want to go a little more intense, this is actually a fairly well-known THD thesis. I don't recommend this guy overall, but this book is great. And this is Ken Gentry's book, Before Jerusalem Fell. So this was his THD thesis on the dating of the book of Revelation, and specifically how it makes sense to be dated prior to 70 AD and the destruction of Jerusalem. I think Gentry makes a very strong case for that. If you want a more robust, complete commentary of the book of Revelation itself, the same guy that wrote the Tribulation book, David Chilton, has his classic Days of Vengeance. And I remember the first time I read this, it really blew me away. Those are just some easy ones to, kind of building up to complexity if you want to get into that topic. And unfortunately, while this book is out of print, I did get a copy just because it is a really good book. But it's like $80. I apologize. Maybe it'll come back in print one day, but it will tie into a couple of these other books. And it's basically designed to show that from the Orthodox perspective, the worship service is outlined in the book of Revelation. That's our view, right? And it succeeds, in our view, the temple and the synagogue service. So this classic book, Orthodox Worship, continuity with the synagogue, the temple, and the early church is really the essence of our view. So for people who are interested, those are some good books. One last one for people who really want to get serious about a total study of biblical apocalyptics. This is a classic by Milton Terry. I think he's Methodist, actually. Biblical Apocalyptics, and he really goes through all the prophetic texts and I think puts them in a coherent order. And of course, everybody, as I said earlier, you can get the Orthodox Study Bible, which has excellent notes on all the prophetic texts. I highly recommend that. You can get my book, Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film, at Jay's Analysis. And I will leave it to Mr. John. Anything you'd like to leave us with and promote here at the end?
Like I said, you could read Blessed by Kate Bowler.
Okay.
That's a good book, talking about prosperity gospel. There's another one, I can't remember the author's name, but it's called The Charismatic Century. And then there's another one by Professor Darren Deutschuk, and it's called From Bible Belt to Sun Belt. And that's talking about how California's role in the creation of modern day evangelical church.
Oh,
so
wow.
Specifically about Southern California's role that it played in the creation of not only evangelical beliefs, but also right-wing politics too. So it's a very interesting book. Highly recommend that book.
Yeah, that does sound good. And one more time, what is it?
It's called From Bible Belt to Sun Belt.
Okay.
By Professor Darren Deutschuk. Yeah, I'm pretty good. If anybody's interested in any more of, if you never heard me before, you can go to hoaxbusterscall.com. Hundreds and hundreds of audios we've done on many different things, many different discussions with Mr. Dyer here himself. We also got this new thing that we're trying out. If you go to, it's called the Discord server, and it's like a chat. It's like an ongoing chat. So if you're familiar with Discord, we have the Hoaxbusters Call Discord now, and a lot of people are on there, and they're just having discussions with people, and I go on there and talk to people too. So it's real interesting. It's real fun, and anybody's welcome to come on there. And I'll I give out my email address too if anybody wants to contact me.
Okay.
It's jradams857@yahoo.com. And if anybody wants to contact me, you can contact, or you can send me a PayPal donation there too.
Cool beans. All right. Thank you, John. This has been a great talk. And definitely stay tuned to Jay's analysis this week. We will have hopefully a debate with one of the biggest atheists on YouTube. And that should be, as they say on the Worski stream, blood sports. Let's cross our fingers and hope that this goes down. It'll be a lot of fun. John, thank you very much for joining me tonight. It was a pleasure.
My fingers are crossed.
All right. All right, man. Have a good night.
I don't know if you know. I don't know if you noticed, but I wore my 90210 shirt just for you.
Awesome.
It does have Luke Perry on it.
Does it have Luke on it or Matt? Okay.
It's Luke Perry. You can't see it, but it was just for you.
Thank you.
Here's Luke's face.
Say bye to Luke Perry, everybody. Bye, Luke.
All right. Good night, Jay.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Sayonara.